Hey everybody, welcome to this hangout. I'm Scott, he's Drexel. We're going to be talking about podcasting and we're going to be talking about NLP. We're going to be talking about how do you influence people. One of the big questions that I always get from podcasters is, oh Scott, I got 1,000 downloads of my podcast last week and nobody's bought my book, or nobody's bought this, or nobody's done this, or nothing has happened. I don't even know if they've listened. And of course, the problem that they have is they're not creating influence. And it works also for a lot of people who, I've got this podcast, I've got great information, and I've got 4 people listening to me. Why don't I have more? And I'm a firm believer in NLP for a number of reasons. And the main one is it's not the first one, but one of my very first podcasts was weight loss and the mind. And it was like, think fit, be fit. And, we all know we need to eat better. We all know we need to exercise. Why aren't we? It's what's here. And the person that I had as a co-host was learning NLP at the time, was quite good at what he had learned. And so we did, 100, 120 episodes. And we had so many people sharing the podcast. We had so many people that were losing weight, being happier and all the rest of it. And a lot of it, if not all of it, was due to my sparkling personality. No, it was due to Shane's ability with NLP to influence people, to get them to take action, to actually delve into a little bit of maybe of their subconscious and get them to change. So when Drexel and I met and he agreed to work with me on a couple of podcasting courses, I was just thrilled. So with that, Drexel, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing pretty well after our little technological difficulties we just had. But I'm happy to be here and excited to provide some more value for the people who listen to this channel.
Great. Awesome. And Drexel is referring to blab.im, which we were going to use to do this chat. And for whatever reason, I believe that Drexel has been blacklisted by Blab and Twitter for... He's too influential for them. They don't want to have anything to do with him.
Yeah. It's unfortunate that NLP doesn't work on technology the way it works on humans.
That's right. So basically, we just spent the last hour trying to get onto Blab. We had the tech people at Blab who had never, ever heard or seen any of this. We sent them all the texts and everything else that we got in terms of errors. And we moved over here to Google Hangouts and have no problem. So just wanted to let you know about that. All right. So Drexel, why don't we start with, I was going to say like how you got into NLP, but I would prefer to get into why you feel NLP is such a powerful I'm going to say process, okay? Because there's an awful lot to it, but in a kind of like a general overall view, as opposed, someone who's taken some training in NLP versus somebody who has no clue and doesn't do anything naturally. Sometimes, there's a lot of people that use the principles of NLP who have never been trained in it because they've either just been exposed to things or they've said certain things and got a good response and positive reinforcement. They just kept doing it, or they've been it's just sort of the way that they speak, or some of the things that they've read, and maybe they didn't know that person was using NLP. But what's the difference in your opinion between somebody who understands how this works, and it's really how the brain works and the mind works, versus someone who doesn't?
Well, I think the most important takeaway from NLP is that all human beings, and really all animals in general, are constantly communicating. They're communicating something. They're communicating with facial expressions, with body language, with the words they choose, with the tone of their voice. And people who are trained in NLP, at least in the context of communicating with others, NLP can be used for a lot of stuff. You can use it on yourself. But when you're using it with other people or on other people, what it does is it gives you the awareness of what is being communicated, not only by the other person, but also more awareness of what you are communicating as well. So I would say it's really a process of making the unconscious conscious in terms of communication.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So when we're unconsciously communicating, is it safe to assume that we're doing a very poor job of it?
No, I wouldn't say that, but the more you know, the higher degree of control you have over the conversation, and the more powerful your frame is within that conversation. So let me give you an example of something that I used to do. I've used NLP in a therapeutic setting. I've used it in a sales setting, which is where I really shine with it. But let's say that there's an individual, let's say it's one of your friends, and every time your friend is excited, he goes like this. Okay, now it's kind of a goofy gesture in general, but everyone has their own gestures that they use for different moods that they're in. Now, if you aren't paying close attention, you might not realize that your friend does that whenever they're excited. But if you are aware of it and you pick up on that connection, then if you desire to make your friend excited about something, while you're describing something, you can just kind of start doing that. You can feed that gesture back to them, and then their subconscious will recognize, hey, that means excitement. This is not something they're going to pick up on consciously.
Right.
You can sort of engineer people's behavior by using the words they like, the gestures they tend to use. It's a very powerful way to build rapport because people like people who are similar to them, subconsciously and consciously. So when people subconsciously notice that you're using the same words and gestures, they afford you a greater degree of trust, and they follow your lead much more readily and much more easily.
And this is also something that can happen when you're in rapport with somebody and you're not aware of it. Like I'm quite familiar with the idea of modeling, right? So if somebody's got their arm up this way or whatever, and I do the same thing consciously, I'm creating, and tell me if I've got this all wrong, I'm trying to create this rapport. But I notice sometimes when I'm in a really deep discussion with somebody, and then I sort of pull myself out and I observe what's going on, they'll be like this and I'll be like this, right? And it's not conscious or anything, but it's just like we're really intense. And then I'll look and I'll look, oh my God, we're in exactly the same mirror position of each other, sort of thing.
No, you're exactly right. In fact, there's at least 1 or 2 lectures in my class NLP for Sales and Persuasion where I talk about that exactly, where I talk about when people are in rapport, they naturally match and mirror each other, which is the phenomenon you're talking about with the similar body positioning. And you can create rapport artificially by doing it on purpose. And the nice thing is that when you create rapport artificially with matching and mirroring, unless you get caught, which should never happen, it very quickly becomes real rapport. And the other person usually doesn't know what's going on. I did get caught doing NLP one time, and I've caught other people doing it to me, but only because I know, I know the same tricks, which is funny because it's hard to trust someone if you catch them doing NLP with you. So practice makes you stickier.
Like, are they manipulating me or not, sort of thing, right?
Yeah. Well, the woman who caught me, I wasn't trying to sell her anything. I was just trying to build a connection with her. So I was doing this connection pattern, and she kind of crossed her arms and she goes, "I know what you're doing." I said, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "I'm an NLP trainer and a hypnotherapist." So I'm sure I blushed a little bit, but it ended up just being funny and just a joke between us from that point on. But yeah, so you don't want to be super obvious about it. Like you don't want to be 100%, like you don't want to be playing that like stage game where you're following all of their moves. That's way too obvious.
Right.
So there's power in subtlety.
That's right. I was just going to say that the whole idea of NLP is it's the subtle communication. It's a communication on lots of different levels, right? As opposed to, like you said, the word, the tone, your body language, your expressions, how, even probably, what you're thinking. Sometimes maybe that just gets, I know in my case, it's always reflected in my face, but sometimes I think we can be thinking things and it just kind of, Napoleon Hill talks about us being receivers and transmitters, right?
Excuse me. Yeah, that's very much true. Our brains are very much like radios where we send signals, we receive signals. And the most fascinating thing about the way that our minds work is that we don't need to have any awareness of this for it to happen. It's just how we're programmed, how we're designed, created, evolved, whatever word you choose for it. It's just the fact of how our brains are. We're just human frequency transmitters and receivers as well.
So Drexel, since a lot of the people that I train in podcasting are audio podcasters. I'm sure it would be different if it's video. Obviously, like we're doing video right now, my hands are moving, and I'm smiling, and or what whatever. You have those visual cues. But if you're in a medium like radio or audio podcasting where you don't have the visual cues, what are some of the things that you can do? With your voice or your tones or the sounds that you make. That's all we have really is the sound that we're making. It's audio. It's not visual. What are some of the things that we should be concerned of, or more aware of maybe than we are?
Sure. There's one main thing that I always harp on. I've taught at the fundraising and sales companies I've worked for, and I'll get to that in 1 second, but I want to address what you said first about how people can't see you gesticulating, they can't see your facial expressions. Even though your audience cannot see you, you should still be doing all of those things. Now, I know that can sound a little bit goofy at first, like, well, why does it matter? And the fact is that the communication coming from you is all coherent. It's all one big piece. And so if you're sitting there with your head down and your arms crossed and you're trying to sound excited about your product, your audience is going to pick up on your mood, which is, engineered by this kind of closed off body language.
Right.
So if you're sitting in the studio and you're smiling and your hands are moving and you're excited and you're enthusiastic, that energy will be transmitted through the audio to your listeners. Because even though it's technically a sound signal coming through, energy, emotion itself is a frequency. It is energy. And even though it looks like there's empty space all around us, it's not true, because light and sound couldn't go from one side of the room to the other if there was no medium for it to go through, right? So when you are emitting certain energy, anyone seeing it or listening to it will still pick up on that. So it is important to keep yourself moving around even if people can't see you.
And I want to jump in here too, because I remember seeing a clip where they were interviewing Robin Williams when he was the genie in Aladdin and the Lamp, or whatever the movie was that Disney put out. And of course, that's a cartoon. So all he's doing is speaking his lines, right? So they show him actually in the studio and he's moving around and all of these things, right? And I think they filmed him, and then the animators took that in and used probably a lot of his movements and motions in the movie as well when they animated it. But I thought, because I had never thought about it before, and you reminded me of it just now, where because I really thought it was like, oh yeah, you're just there, hello, blah 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 blah, but no, like he was like right into and I've seen the odd one since, and I've watched, and sure enough, like they're in some, like if it's like, oh no, and it's scary, like they look scared and they've got their hands up and they've got all the actions that would go as if they were being filmed live, even though they're going to be in a cartoon, right?
Yeah, I mean, it all comes across in very subtle ways in your vocal tone and the energy that's behind your words. But to answer the question you asked me a few minutes ago, is there anything you can do just with your voice? There is a lot you can do, but I don't want to get too complex with it for the sake of this video. But the main thing that I always harp on is to make sure that you're not uptoning your voice when you're telling people what to do. So in a sales context, your commands when you're telling people what to do is stuff like share my podcast, buy my product, subscribe to my service, tell your friends about this, make sure to sign up for my newsletter. Just 5 examples right there. And you want to have that commanding tone where it has a drop at the end. We're saying subscribe to my podcast, buy my product, sign up for my newsletter. You don't want to be saying buy my product, sign up for my newsletter, share this with your friends.
Right.
Because when you tone your voice up like that, it always sounds like a question. So you're giving someone a command, but your voice tone is telling them it's a question, which confuses them. It confuses them. They don't really understand the communication, and they're not going to do what you say. Now, I've seen this. I've trained at multiple companies. I've trained the other staff, people who were there for years longer than me, because a lot of their people were doing this and not understanding why they were having bad results. I worked for environmental groups and TV stations and solar. And so for example, from the solar company, there was one girl there who would uptone every single sentence she said. So she'd be at someone's door saying, hi, I'm here from this solar company, and I want you to sign up for a free appointment so we can do a consultation. And she sounded like a child, first of all, not like a serious business person, but she had very poor results in terms of the number of people who actually signed up through her. And most people are very unaware of these little differences in how in what voice tone can do. But in verbal English, there's really only three kinds of sentences. There are statements, which are just kind of flat, like Johnny go to the store, or Johnny went to the store. There's questions like Johnny went to the store, or Johnny go to the store. And then there's commands like Johnny go to the store. So the same words or very similar words, depending on which intonation you use, it turns into a different sentence. I've seen studies that say that only 7% of human communication is the words that we use, and the remaining 93% is nonverbals like body language and paraverbals such as tone. So that's one quick trick that people can start to do. It can be kind of jarring at first when you become aware of this, because then you start to talk, you're like, wait, am I doing this wrong? So it takes some practice, but you want to make sure when you're giving people a command that you're using that commanding tone.
Right. And that's one of the things I think that people miss when they talk about whether they should podcast or not. I think podcasting or, being on the radio or TV or something like that is an amazing personal development skill, process, not really a skill, if you then go and listen to yourself afterwards. So hard to do in the beginning because we have this, it doesn't sound like me sort of thing going on. And you can be really judgmental. But if you start to train your ear, you notice, these like the obvious one is the ums, the ahs, whenever there's a silence as you're trying to think of something, your mouth wants to make some noise to fill the silence. But the other side of it, and a far more subtle aspect of it, is what you were just saying about, are you giving commands at the right time? Are you asking questions at the right time? Are you, and are you just making your statements at the right time? And
can I interject for 1 second?
Sure.
Something just occurred to me. So at the very beginning of this Google Hangout, you talked about people who get lots of downloads but no sales with their products, and they're trying to figure out why. So that can be part of it, but the other part, which was implied by what I just said, but I hadn't made it explicit, is that you have to actually tell people to buy your product. You have to actually, it's called a call to action in sales terminologies.
Yes.
You have to direct them what to do. Because I think a lot of people, especially when they first start out in business, they have this idea that if they just provide a lot of really great content, people are automatically going to seek out their products and try to find the buy button. And that might be true sometimes, but you're going to get much, much better results and more sales if you pepper your speech, or at the end of your podcast, you tell them, click the link below to go find my book or go find my course or whatever it is. So people also need to be assertive enough and believe in the value of their product enough. Even if they're a great speaker, have a great podcast, you need to be assertive and tell people to buy your product and direct them on how to do so.
I totally agree, because many, many times they're going to be coming to you and saying, well, I didn't know that you had this or that service, or you didn't tell me. And why didn't you tell me? Right? I would have been using your service for 2 years if you'd have told me. I've been listening to your podcast for 2 years. You never told me to do that.
I think people have some conflicting emotions about marketing and sales and selling things. I think when I first started out, I had some emotional barriers around asking other people for money just because I had never done it before. But if you have a good product and it's going to help people, the way I think of it now is that you owe it to them to do what it takes to get that product in their hands, because it's going to improve their lives. So if that means you getting out of your comfort zone and saying, hey, here's how you buy my product, I want you to purchase this, then that's what you got to do for their sake as well as your own.
Right. And as the podcast host, you're the leader of your audience. And how many leaders, live in their comfort zone, to put it mildly, right? None. So get out of it.
Well, my definition of leadership, it's changed throughout my life, but at this point, I consider that leadership or power to be the flip side of responsibility. So essentially, I see leadership as taking responsibility for the well-being of your tribe. And this goes back to what I just said. If your product is going to help them, then it's your responsibility to get it in their hands.
That's right. That's a really good way of looking at it. And I think and I think this whole idea of being a leader is something that everyone that gets up in front of a mic really has to own. I don't know any other way of putting it except just really own it. So, you know what? I'm the leader. So where are we going?
Mm-hmm. You have to, if you're the captain of the ship, you have to be confident, not only to get to the destination, but because people won't follow you if you sound shaky or unsure. So,
can you imagine
you know what I mean?
Do you know the story of Cortez when he was told by the King of Spain to go and conquer South America?
I don't.
Okay, well, Cortez was told by the King of Spain or Portugal or someplace, there's the city of gold is in South America somewhere, go get it and don't come back if you don't succeed, right? So he gets there and he's got like 5 ships. So I don't know, 500 men, maybe 700 men, maybe 1,000 men. I don't know how many people fit on a ship. And he arrives and they look out and there's like 1 million natives mad. So everybody is like, oh my God, we're going to die. And so he says, everybody off the ship, set up camp. So they all get off the ship and then he goes around and he burns all 5 ships.
Oh yeah, I have heard of this story.
So they all get there, they're setting up and they're looking and the ships are burnt. They're going to Davy Jones' locker. Mm-hmm. He gets back up on shore, gets on a little hill and he says, okay, Spain's that way. There's no boats. Success is that way. There's 1 million people in our way. And so you're either going to die or you're going to be living a great life because we'll have conquered South America. Which one do you want to do? And they had no choice, right? If they wanted to live. And
that's a very similar story. I don't know if it's in Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, but there's a story at the beginning about a little girl who's asking for 50 cents for her mother. Are you familiar with this story?
Yeah, I love that story.
Yeah, and she ends up basically verbally dominating this like slave master, basically this guy, simply because she has not left herself the option of leaving without those 50 cents.
Right.
And she burned her ships behind her when she walked into the barn, basically. It's a very inspiring story.
It really is, just standing up, and it just drives me crazy when I see people who should be standing up caving. And it just happens, every once in a while I see it, and I just, particularly in movies or on TV shows, it's just like, what are you teaching all the millions of people that are watching this, right? Mm-hmm. Not a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people have leadership potential, but most of them, I mean, everyone likes to be led by strong leaders. It's comforting to have someone who's grounded, who's stable, who's not going to cave in, who knows where you're going, who knows how to get there, and who takes responsibility for the whole team. So as the podcaster, consider your audience. You can even visualize it while you're speaking, could be useful, that you're at the brow of the ship and your audience is on the ship and you have to decide, where are we going? How are we going to get there?
That's right.
And then you speak in a confident way because people follow strength.
That's right. That's right. And so let's talk about this. This is maybe a little bit of a tangent, Drexel, but it's a pet peeve. It's a pet peeve of mine. Okay. And I'll tell you the story, how it happened. Okay. And I don't know. I mean, it's almost like it's a human condition. I was at an event in England 7 years ago. And basically it was everyone was from England there, except I was there from Canada, and there was an American who was about 35, strikingly handsome and somewhat arrogant, as you would expect from a successful entrepreneur that wasn't particularly mature. And there was a kind of this undercurrent of, could an American come in and just sell the same way he does in the United States in England? The answer is yes, by the way. And he did. So there was, I don't know, maybe 70 people, and about 20 of them bought his product for between $3,000 and $5,000. And it was in beta, and it would be 2 years before, 2 years later, it was still in beta. And 3 or 4 people that were at that event and ran into me in other places asked me, like, how come this guy hasn't delivered? And they're still, waiting for what they bought to be delivered. And I thought, it was a great example of somebody who had nothing to offer, but had all the confidence in the world. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
there were other people there who, I mean, had nothing to offer, had all the confidence in the world and was to the extreme of pretty much ripping everybody off. When, as far as I know, as far as what I know about how the story ends. And then there were other people there that had something and it was valuable and it worked, but they weren't very confident at all. So of course they sold none or one, and this guy sold everybody pretty much. And it always strikes me, like, because I've been to lots of events and I see that where it's like, wow, like that guy is really confident. I was at an event locally and one of the more successful Canadian speakers in his field was there. And there was a couple other people I knew. And so I said, well, and I was watching, and sure enough, everybody got up, did their, 1 hour presentation or whatever. And maybe one person went to the back. This guy, he had everybody eating out of the palms of his hands. He was very experienced. He's 60 odd years old, been doing it for 40 years sort of thing, knew exactly what to do. It was great to watch. And everyone ran to the back of the room. And I said to my friend, how come you're not going and buying, right? And he says, I bought something from that guy 20 years ago. I'll never buy anything else from him.
Oh, wow.
And I don't think, actually, personally, this guy's stuff was bad. I think it probably was really good if you followed the system. But it just always struck me as like, and you've brought it up, which is kind of why I wanted to bring it up too, is like, I guess it's knowledge. Like, if I know that I'm more likely to follow somebody who's really confident, then I'm aware that I'm going to be going that way. So now I need to really look and make sure what that person is offering is what I want.
Yeah. I mean, I've been approached by several multi-level marketing people, and I've gone to a couple presentations because they're very aggressive and very persistent. So I would go just to shut them up, basically. And I mean,
welcome to the club.
The products are usually garbage, as far as I can tell. But what they do at these presentations is they have a super enthusiastic, super confident speaker. They have great music playing. They show videos of happy people smiling who used to be just like you until they discovered this. And now look how happy they are. They're traveling the world. They pump you full of these good emotions. And so people can very easily confuse being filled with good emotions for the quality of the product. And in fact, that's what con men rely on. That's why most of these multi-level marketing things don't work. And why something like 97% of people never make any money with them. It's because they got sucked into the positivity. A lot of NLP seminars are like this as well, where they're not actually communicating useful information to people, but they're getting them to stand up and do these like, I am strong and I feel great exercises. So they leave the seminar feeling great, thinking they got a lot of value out of it, when in fact they were just given this inspirational feeling. So it's very important, I think, how do I word this? To not let your emotions get the best of you. And that's true everywhere in life.
Right.
If you could see an absolutely beautiful woman who's not a very good person, but you blind yourself to that because of the feeling that you get by dating such a beautiful woman.
Right.
So it's very similar. It's important to
just pick up the latest National Enquirer. You want to know what we're talking about, right?
That magazine sells so incredibly well. I think I read it. It's like the third best-selling publication in the United States or something like that. Yeah,
like the Bible and one other book or magazine is more popular. It's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. And good marketers know, and I mean, every marketer does this. You try to inspire people, get them to feel certain emotions. The trick is to make sure that your product actually delivers as well, because otherwise you ruin your reputation. And that's why a lot of like old Wild West con men, they would go from town to town with their tricks, because by the time people realized what was going on, they were already gone. Mm-hmm. So they couldn't stay there and keep selling their snake oil because everyone knew what kind of man or woman they were.
Right.
So I would just encourage people to always, maybe if you're feeling really inspired, take a few seconds, take a few deep breaths and see, is this product, does it sound like something logically that's going to help me? Yeah. And of course, if you're going to be a business owner, you should have good products that actually will help people. I forgot who said it, but I heard a saying that great marketing just makes a bad product fail faster. So you gotta, when you're selling, you have to hit, or podcasting, or anytime you're influencing someone, you do want to hit that emotional side of people. Absolutely. You can't sell without it. But then also that logical side, so that they can feel good and then logically convince themselves like there's a good reason for why I feel good. And then that they're still going to feel good after they use the product as well.
Right. And as you, and I guess we're spiraling a little bit out of control here, and I want to bring it back to the NLP.
I tend to do that.
But this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm so happy we're having it. And I think the other problem is if people don't sit down and decide, this is what I want to do, and this is where I want to go, and these are the tools that I want to use. Now, there may be a process of learning in there where you say, you know what, I'm going to take this course and that course and this course and that course and this course and that course, so that I kind of get an idea of all these different areas if I need that. And I'm not just talking about marketing. It could be, do I want to be a longshoreman? Do I want to be a lumberjack? Do I want to be a doctor? Do I want to be this? I mean, you can kind of go and find out about different things until you sort of make up your mind. But in this particular group that was in England, like, they were all people that had businesses and they wanted to market their business. And I think what happens is that they get into what we call the shiny object syndrome, where, oh, this is cool, and I do that. I mean, I see myself doing that from time to time. But what I do more and more is I just sit down and say, okay, this is what I want to accomplish, and there is 455,000 tools that I can use. I'm going to focus on this one, and maybe that one. And then the discipline comes in. Because Drexel comes up and says, Scott, I got this great thing. It's going to do this, and I'm going to get all excited because he's confident, he's excited, I feel good, I like him, he's my friend, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, and away you go. So that discipline, I think, is part of the problem that we need. Maybe it's a muscle that we need to continually strengthen, to just say, no, this is what I'm going to do. And the other part of it, I think, is there's a fear of loss, right? Like, if I don't use this and Drexel uses it in his business and his business explodes, and mine could have if I'd have just done the same thing, or, and that, I mean, that could be taken as an MLM opportunity, or it could be just taken as, I have my business, Drexel has his business, and they're totally different businesses, but we're kind of maybe both local or whatever. And he's going to do this. And if it works for him, well, I'll be 6 months behind. Right. So there's always that kind of fear of losing out, because this thing is going to be way better than that stupid little thing over there that you already decided you want to use.
Yeah, it's very true. Discipline is very important with this kind of stuff as well.
Cool. All right. So we're getting close to, 20 or 25 minutes. And so we're going to tie it all up super, super soon. But the other one little thing I wanted to talk a bit about when it came to podcasting is, we've talked about like the vocal tones and that sort of stuff, but what about the actual words? Because there are feeling words, there are logical words, there are like touchy words and sound words. And
the modalities.
The modalities, yes.
Sure.
And I think there's two parts to this. One is, if somebody is an auditory learner, and chances are if they listen to a podcast, they are, but you're not, even if you're doing a podcast, then you're not going to be saying, what I heard the other day, or what I heard you say, Drexel, or they're not going to be using those words to draw in the interest of that person. Or if they're feeling people and they're not using, it's warm to your touch, and the way that guy in England acted really made me cold, or visually, he's we have all these different cues that we can talk about, and I think it's really important that we kind of cover it all, because otherwise you miss out, I think, on connecting with people.
Yeah, I mean, we go pretty far into detail on that in that last course that we made, but we can do a quick basic overview, which is that in NLP we split something called modalities. Excuse me. And most people have one modality that they use to process the sensory data of the world more than others. So for example, VKA is kind of the abbreviation. So we talk about a visual modality, which means seeing, a kinesthetic modality, which means feeling, and an auditory modality, which means hearing. So a good example of the difference, we all use all three, but most people tend to be dominant in one or the other. So if someone tells you something that you understand, a visual person would say, I see what you're saying. An auditory person would say, I hear what you're saying. Or a kinesthetic person might say, they might say, yeah, I kind of have a good feeling of what you're talking about. So you see, one person's talking about hearing, one's talking about feeling, and one's talking about seeing. Now, sorry, I feel like I'm going to sneeze here. 1 second.
Gesundheit.
Thank you. So when you're podcasting, you want to reach as wide an audience as possible. So you want to be sure to pepper your speech or your presentations with visual words describing the way things look, with kinesthetic words describing the way they feel, and with auditory words describing the way things sound. Now, when you get a good balance of all these, you're making sure that you're saying something that appeals to everybody. Because if you're a visual person and you only describe things in visual terms, you might accidentally be alienating people who are primarily kinesthetic or auditory. So that's a really good reason to use all three if you can. And again, this does take work. It's not something you're like, oh, I get that, now I'm going to start doing it. You really have to sit down and like you were saying, listen to yourself speaking so you can figure out what your modality is and the kind of words you usually use. And then go to some effort to start interspersing your communication with these different modalities.
Cool. Awesome. All right. So I think we're pretty much out of time. Drexel, I want to thank you very much. I know this has been an exercise in futility, but at least we did get on and we did get this done, which was good.
Yeah, we got a great video out of it, even if the blab itself didn't work out.
No, that's right. And now I'm scared to invite anybody to blab. I don't want this happening. I think it's just people that I asked to join the blab it's going to happen to. But so why don't we leave everybody with one tip that you'd like to give them?
One tip that I would like to give them: lead the ship. There's some value in starting a podcast or radio show and saying, people, please call in and give me stuff to talk about. Every once in a while, that can make sense to make people feel like they're participating. But remember that you're the leader. You're the one with the value or the expertise. And so talk about what you know and talk about it like an expert, because if you're running a podcast, then you should be an expert on that topic. You would be the expert. You're the authority. Yes. And I want to add a little bit to that because I think that's a really, really good tip. And it's, I think I forgot what I was going to say. Uh-oh. If you're the leader, I did forget. Okay, we don't need to add to that tip. Another tip: remember your content. Remember your content. That's right. Or normally I have a piece of paper and I write down something so that if you're saying it, I'll write it down and it'll tweak me. And I'm sure as soon as I hang up, I'm going to go, oh yeah, I wanted to say that. Yeah. But I think it's really important that you grab onto that leadership mantle and that you just run with it. And your tribe, your community, however you want, your audience, however you want to describe the people listening to you or watching you, they're there for you and remember now what it is. They're there to hear what you have to say, to be inspired by what you have to say, and to move forward in a direction that's congruent with the direction that you're moving in. And you need to, and I think that's a really important responsibility. Like you said, being a leader is taking responsibility for the direction that you're going. And oftentimes people say, well, I don't know what to talk about. And I always say, what happened in the last week or in the last month that relates to the general topic that your podcast is on, and tell stories about that, because it's the stories that are also going to be inspiring to your audience. So rather than, because a lot of times, particularly with keynote speakers, they have like 2 speeches. And if you ask them to talk about anything else, they don't know what to say because they're so used to just rattling off these 2 speeches that they've done 1,000 times.
And to me, it's like, no, just stop for a second. Don't rattle off the same old stuff that you've always rattled off. How does what you're teaching apply to somebody you talked to last week or something that happened to you last week?
Yeah.
And one of my favorite podcasts I've ever done was with a fellow named Dov Barron. And I would drive to his office, and it was just our routine, right? He was like 10 minutes away. I would drive, I'd set up, we would talk, and he would say, you know, and then he would say, okay, what are we going to talk about in our podcast? And I'd say, okay, well, this happened to me. And I would just describe, and it could be like I'm watching two guys racing down the road trying to kill each other or something, right? It was just like, why did that happen in front of me here? But it's an interesting story. I'm going to share it, and then we're going to sort of dissect it. And that's the way we came up with the content, because he was a very much, and still is very much, an expert in his field, and he didn't need any prepping. And of course we did it for, well, we're still doing it. It's been 5 or 6 years. So of course we know each other very well. And I would just say, okay, you know, this is what happened, and let's talk about it. And usually it was a very good little, you know, it ended up being a really good conversation, totally off the cuff, because we were just talking like two good old friends would be talking. But it always related. There was always a moral to the story, and it always related to the overall theme of the podcast. So what happens in our lives is, I think too often, here's my rant starting. I should have just not remembered this. But, you know, I think too often in our lives, we have this little bit of information we think we need to share, and we have all this other experience here that can color the information that we want to share. And that's what we need to do, is we need to say, hey, this is what happened. This is how I used this principle or these ideas or these concepts in my real life, in a real life situation. Here's the story, blah, 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 and away you go. And then I think that really helps create a depth of connection that you don't get, because you're not going deep into yourself to pull out, this is my life and this is what I did here. And maybe I'm not that happy about it and I wish I'd have done this, but here's how this relates to whatever my podcast is relating about. So there you go. Any last words, Drexel?
I don't have any last words besides, if you're listening to this, if you run a podcast, me and Scott do teach classes on udemy.com. So if you do want to find out more in-depth information about how to use NLP in your podcasts, be sure to check out our courses there. If you're more into the NLP side of things and you want to learn all the secret tricks that I learned in hypnotherapy school when I spent my 2 years there, particularly in a sales context, make sure you also check out my class there, NLP for Sales and Persuasion. It's a deeper digging into the secrets of language than you'll probably find anywhere else. And everyone who's taken it so far loves it. So if that's up your alley, make sure to check that out as well.
And I love those courses too. And not just the ones that I'm in, but the other ones that Drexel has done. I'm going to be putting links to the courses in the description below, and you'll be able to click on there and go check them out. So thanks for joining us, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.